and so delighted that you are joining us this evening. We are going to have a fantastic discussion tonight. I am so looking forward to this topic, especially as we are still in Minority Health Month. Minority Health Month is probably not something that we often think about, but fortunately, it does exist, and it does exist for a reason. Tonight, during our discussion, you will hear why it is important that we talk about minority health. Joining me, of course, as co host is none other than Dr. Rogers Kane. How are you, Dr. Kane?
I'm doing fabulous. I'm gonna steal Lorene's line. I'm doing fabulous.
Also joining us is a regular. If you tuned in last Tuesday, I told you, I promised you that she'll be back. And that is, of course, Dr. Lorene Husband. How are you this evening, Lorene?
I'm doing fantastic and fabulous.
So the Lorene shared with us the reason she's doing fantastic and fabulous is because she just ran how many miles?
5,
5 miles, and also did what?
lifted weights.
Because it is a way of life for her. And that's something that we are going to talk about tonight, why it is important that we focus on our health so that we won't be one of the statistics that we hear about or read about, those of us who follow statistics. We also have joining with us, and looks like she has some technical difficulties, is Monica Valdez Lupi. Hopefully I pronounced her name correctly. If I didn't, owe it to my head and not my heart. And she's joining us from the Kresge Foundation. Hopefully, I said that right. And I failed to mention that Lorene is with Feeding Northeast Florida. Lorene shook her head. Did I pronounce anything wrong with
Yeah,
our
you
the
messed it up. You messed it up.
It's the Kresge Foundation.
Kresge Foundation? So as soon as she tunes in, I see a green screen, but I can't see her. So we're going to go ahead and just, let's talk for a few minutes while she is adjusting her camera. Dr. Kane, we like to either begin or end our show talking about just briefly what's going on with COVID. So I shared with you, Dr. Kane, that the rates here in Duval or in Florida are up the past 2 weeks, 53%. What is really going on? Because I'm seeing more and more people show up. I happen to be at a vaccine site today, and it was slow but steady with people coming to get vaccinated. Why are we still seeing the rate of vaccines going up?
The rate of vaccine or the
I
rate
mean,
of
of
the
the
virus?
virus. I'm sorry, the
I think
virus.
we're seeing it because more and more people, when I'm out and about right now, I don't see anyone wearing masks, except maybe me and a few others. They're not wearing masks for protection. I think that most, people are saying the pandemic is over. Um, but all you have to do is ask our vice president. From her perspective, it's not over because she was announced today as having COVID.
Yeah, I saw that, and I won't say that I'm happy. I'm happy that they announced that she has it and doesn't keep it a secret, because to let people know none of us are immune from it, right?
Nope.
We get vaccinated to reduce our risk of getting very sick, hospitalized, and of course of dying from it. But nobody's immune from it, and that's the thing that people have to realize. As you observe people just resuming all sorts of normal activities, and they don't wear masks. But it's the other part of it, the pressure of feeling like because you're around other people who are unmasked that you don't need to be masked. And of course, we know that it's all about protecting one another. So tonight, as I mentioned, we are going to have a lively discussion. Our topic is racial justice and health equity. Now, that's a mouthful, right? Racial justice and health equity. Dr. Kane, what does that mean to you? What does that topic say to you?
Well, as you know, historically, our country has had quite a few issues with racial justice. There's no recognition, and as a matter of fact, the powers to be really appear to want to discredit the strength of which this country was built upon, the people for which this country was built upon. And I have no reservations about saying that it was built on the backs of black women, especially black women. Um, and it's not this is not about a, well, actually, it's about racial inequity. So let's call it like it is. Um, we helped build this country. We made the country as rich as it is, especially black women, because they had babies to make them enrich their slave owners. They also had took care of the slave owners' children and fed them, sometimes from their own breast. And they worked the fields, many of them, and so with back-breaking labor. But the reward we've seen so far to this date is that we have anything from redlining in our community, and to the point that it appears your zip code may determine how healthy you are as far as your health status is concerned. So there's a lot of disparities in terms of healthcare, what healthcare is being provided to what communities, and there's the injustice of it all by not allowing every man, woman, and child to be equal in their own rights and have equal access to health, a healthy lifestyle, especially as it relates to food. We've talked about food insecurities, lack of food security in our past show, and Dr. Husband can really speak well on this because of her experience as in a regular way. We're really looking at the need to make access to health and the other necessities to maintain a healthy lifestyle, make it equitable as far as, especially as the races are concerned, but also as classes are concerned.
Yeah, and Lorene, you and I were talking earlier about when we talk about monitoring statistics and really having a full understanding of what's going on with people of all ages and races and so on and so forth. We were talking about the YRBS, the Youth Risk Behavior Survey, and we know that that's a very important tool that we've often used, having worked in public health, because it lets us know as a community, as a city, what's going on with our youth. Sure, we know about the youth in our own families, but collectively, and folks have to know when they're sending their child to school, sure, you want to know what's going on with the rest of the children. Tell us what's the latest news about YRBS and why it's important, especially as we talk about racial justice and health equity.
So I just found out today through some of my advocacy groups that the state of Florida is trying to withdraw quietly without any attention to the public or giving the public any notice from administering the Youth Risk Behavior Survey in our state, which is to me a huge mistake. But it seems to be in line with what's happening in Florida, and which is we are trying to make decisions without data. And this particular form of data that we have been collecting from our children in middle and high school is very, very important. It has resulted into a lot of interventions that we currently have in our schools that most people would not even know that were a result of the Youth Risk Behavior Survey, and what children were telling us they needed and what was going on with them. So without knowing what the population is telling us, we cannot create the right interventions. And I know Monica can speak to that.
Welcome, Monica. And I'm going to call you Monica since Lorene and I are friends. So now I feel like you're my new friend. So welcome to the show. And I'm happy that you were able to work out with our behind the scenes technology guru, Tyrone.
Yay.
Your ability to get on. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining the show. How are you this evening?
I am well, thank you, and apologies for the technical challenges, but I'm happy to see you all.
It happens to all of us. And what we were talking about, as you know, is racial justice and health equity. And I'm just going to shoot it to you, Monica. Why do you think people are so threatened by health equity or equity and justice? Why do you think people are, it seems to be so threatening to people. Why do you think that is?
It's interesting because I miss some of the earlier conversation that Laureen was sharing, but I think that many of us who have worked in public health have been talking about all of the challenges related to equity and racial justice, and everything is coming to a head now, right? In terms of what the public is hearing and what all of us who come from and have experienced as people of color have just this is how we've survived in this country. So I think for issues or topics related to racism and how that impacts the ways in which people seek care and the challenges in accessing care, especially during COVID. COVID has pulled the curtain back on what many of us in public health have known. And so I think maybe for the dominant culture, you're all in Florida. I'm zooming in from Baltimore. Depending on the communities that you talk to and the people that you kind of hang with, this might be the first time that they're hearing it, unfortunately. And so I think it's on us to talk about the ways in which we can use this moment in time as an opportunity to address longstanding inequities in health.
Yeah, what we were talking about here in Florida, unfortunately, we're seeing so many systems that were in place to make sure that we understand what's going on with us, or either to try to achieve some sense of equity. We're seeing systems being dismantled. Now, we know that they were not perfect systems to begin with. Dr. Kane referenced redlining. We've seen a shift in the way the lines were drawn with our elected officials. Now we're seeing that the Florida Department of Education has pulled out of the YRBS, the Youth Risk Behavior Survey. And I remember, Monica, when I shared with a group of parents that the latest YRBS survey results a few years ago, they had no idea that there were so many youth that were attempting or thought about committing suicide, and or youth that were being bullied until and this happened to be a group of Hispanic people. And one of the parents said that they went home and asked their child, and they said, yeah, I've been bullied. I had no idea that her child had been bullied. And had we not had that discussion, that's why it's so important that we do have these discussions. And I put a couple of comments or notes down that for those folks who wonder why we combine racial justice and health equity, because there's so much overlap. Racial justice is the systematic fair treatment of people of all races, resulting in equitable opportunities and outcomes for all, right? We all want equitable opportunities for one another, hopefully. Health equity is achieved when every person has the opportunity to attain his or her full potential, health potential. Unfortunately, people don't understand when that's important until they're going in as an elderly person, as a person who has an elderly parent trying to seek care, and or if they get some debilitating disease or diagnosis, and they're seeing the systems that are failing them in order to provide care for their loved ones. So equity is not just always about race. And that's what people need to keep in mind. It is so important when it comes to so many facets of our life. Any comments on that, either of you?
Well, I was just going to say, I'm sorry to hear about Laureen and friends about the Youth Risk Behavior Survey. I know that we used it a lot. We relied on it in terms of having information from our middle school and high school students. And in Boston, we actually reviewed and talked about the data with our youth advisory board. And so I can't imagine a time when we actually do need information from young people to talk about the toll that virtual learning and the pandemic has taken on their mental health. I have two, Laureen knows this, I have two kids. One both were in high school. One was in high school, one was in middle school at the start of pandemic. And I know that it really it had a different impact on each of them. And the survey is something that public health uses to start gathering information to begin those important conversations with young people and their family members. And so I would love to figure out a way to think through how are you going to how are you going to get feedback or get that kind of information from young people in Florida without that without that tool in your toolbox.
Hmm. Absolutely. Dr. Kane, is there anything, you have any comment on that or?
Well, one of the things that we're seeing in Florida is the hypocrisy of the Florida government in terms of how this nation is supposed to be about freedom of speech and freedom of access to education and so on and so on. And yet we're seeing a governor and this Republican legislature where they are really banning certain books, banning discussion about certain topics. I mean, to the point that it is crazy, is fanatical in that you banning certain math book because it may refer to the critical race theory is mind-boggling in terms of how the hypocrisy of it, especially when they always have criticized communism as being the entity that doesn't allow the freedom that we do in the United States. But yet, when some people think their dominance in society is being threatened, all of a sudden they want to ban discussions on pertinent topics that would help clarify either the history of this country and or the direction that this country needs to go, whether it's race, classism, socialism, whatever it may be, sexism. You just don't. That is not equity in terms of its population. Health equity is really one of the side effects of this racism that we're seeing throughout the country, and especially in states like Florida and Texas.
Yeah, and I'm going to switch gears for just a second because I want to ask Monica, and I'm putting you on the spot, and Lorene, you're not off the hook, by the way. But I want to ask, April is National Minority Health Month, and it is an opportunity to talk about how institutions and organizations can reduce health disparities and improve the health of racial and ethnic minorities, right? So what are you hearing other than COVID? I know a lot of things came about out of COVID, but when it comes to minority health, what should we think about? What should we focus on? Or what do you hear? What are you seeing that's emerging that we need to pay special attention to?
I'm going to tag team with Laureen. So I can start, and this is something that's really important to us at the Kresge Foundation and the team, the health program team at the foundation. I think, as I mentioned, we've seen a lot of things for people of color, for Blacks, Latinos, and Asian American Pacific Islanders get worse. During COVID, we know that life expectancy, for example, in just 2 years, has decreased almost 3 years between Blacks and Latinos as compared to whites. That's unacceptable. That in just 2 years, right, that we see our BIPOC communities' life expectancy being shortened and that potential to be as healthy as they can be. So I think one of the things that I think we have an opportunity to really work on and to work in partnership with communities is around really looking at the root causes. And I think I saw this in some of the podcasts that you've done, really looking at wealth building opportunities and economic mobility. How do we use this moment to actually, instead of what I'm used to from the public sector side, creating these opportunities for community members and residents to be part of that table of discussion, let them set the table. Give communities the tools and the resources that they need to not just be included in the conversation, but to actually drive change. And so we're seeing some of this work in partnership with some of the community members that we're working with. So I definitely think really getting to the root causes in terms of the wealth gap that we see. You mentioned, Ms. Turner, the redlining and the impacts of redlining. In Baltimore, we were just here today listening to the health commissioner talking about the impacts of that, even in 2022, in terms of transportation, a lack of access to transportation, lack of access to jobs. Many of the frontline workers who didn't have the luxury of working remotely, or they might not have had paid leave benefits. This is the time. Childcare, transportation. I think this is an opportunity that we can't ignore. So those are some of the. I think those are some of the other issues that I would throw in there in terms of other factors that we know contribute to overall health and well-being.
Thank you. And I think of, and Lorene, I'll let you chime in. I think of, those folks that you say, I know places where I've gone and who's on the front line, like you say, they're minorities. They're young women, for instance. We don't even think about ladies and unfortunately the children that have been left behind when so many people lost their lives due to COVID. But you also started out by talking about the life expectancy being reduced. And we already know those factors that contribute to the years of potential life loss and the contributing factors to that. Lorene, I know your passion is always about families. What are your thoughts about minority health as it relates to children?
I think Monica kind of hit on it. One of the things that I'm seeing, and I know that the Northeast Florida Population Health Consortium has been addressing this, is the increased suicidal ideation and increased suicide among youth of color, especially in the Black community. So that is particularly disconcerting and troubling because as a population, those two groups, most youth of color have not been known to commit suicide at the rate that they're committing suicide in the last 3 years. So, and to your earlier question, Jocelyn, there is worldwide trauma that has been inflicted by COVID. And in our country, all the policies that are being rolled back, the civil rights policies that are being rolled back, are now inflicting additional trauma to our communities because it seems like this most of the government is playing, especially in Florida and in the South, has become very autocratic to where people have no voice. Redistricting and limitation of the availability of voting sites or even ability to vote for candidates who are representing you. So all those are accumulated traumas on especially people of color that is a major issue. It's a mental health crisis. And we know in Florida, which ranks 49th in mental health services, there's a huge waiting list for people to receive services. And one of the things that, especially when it comes to children and to Tyrone's question, what can we do? We need to have more discussions with our children. We need to invite them in spaces where they feel comfortable to talk to us about what's troubling them. But in addition to children, we also do know that our seniors are dying of social isolation. We need to start rebuilding our villages and really checking on our neighbors wherever we may be to see if they're okay and giving them a lifeline of connectivity so that they don't feel so isolated that their heart literally stops beating because they are so lonely. And our children are also experiencing a lot of loneliness, even though they are connected to people through social media. They are not connected to real life, warm-blooded people who can give them a hug or who can just, say, it's okay, I'm here for you no matter what. So those are some of the strategies I would like to ask our listeners to implement.
And I think that we should make sure we emphasize to our children, as you know, I got 5 girls and 1 knucklehead. As you guys realize that the senior citizens that we have offer so much in knowledge and wisdom, and the things that they repeat, that they can recount. History repeats itself, and we're certainly looking at the attempt at history repeating itself in terms of racism and equities that we have seen in the past. Just when some people thought we were trying to come out of this, certain groups of people were beginning to feel threatened, and they are trying to reiterate their dominance in society. And we have to go back to the old, I'm sorry to say it, but the old fashioned ways of banding together for each other, okay? Whichever minorities there are, banding together to try to make the world right, not to put down any other racial group, just to make the world fair to everyone.
I agree.
Yeah, you're right. And this is a really interesting conversation. And if you're just tuning in, we're talking about racial justice and health equity. We have two very dynamic guests tonight. Feel free to post your questions in the chat, or since I'm not very technologically savvy, post it wherever on your whatever device you're on that allows you that opportunity. But I think Monica, the thing that disturbs me though the most, and I shouldn't say it, but I'm going to, is when we get, oh, wait a minute. We definitely need to do a better job of connecting young people to community elders. Intergenerational approaches will build new leaders in the community. Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank
Worked
you.
in the past.
Yeah, and the social isolation really is so, and just imagine though if you connect young people with elderly people. You learn from elders. They have so much, when you talk about that rich knowledge, they have so much rich knowledge that they can share with love with the younger generation. And we do need to get back to that village. But I want to talk about our role in, what is our role? Lorena and I talk often about not waiting for someone else to save us. What can we do to save ourselves? What should we be doing to save ourselves?
JT, define our, just so the audience will know who we're
We're
talking.
talking about minority health. What can minorities do to help themselves without? Now we know we need the institutions, we need systems in place to help us. I know that, but I'm talking about in general. How can we? How can I? How can our communities, our Black, Indigenous, people of color? Did I get it right, Monica? How can our BIPOC community, what can we do collectively to address and improve our health?
Well, one thing I know, when I was in Boston, when Laureen and I met as the health director, one thing I often heard when I would go to community meetings with our partners just to talk about or to riff off of this intergenerational connection, were elders and people in our neighborhoods in Boston, which still remains unfortunately largely segregated, the same community members coming out, and I don't know if this is this way in Florida, but the same residents, same community members who've been leading. And so, how can we pass this torch to the next generation? Because I think there's wisdom both ways, right? I think their wisdom is, Lorena's pointed out, from elders, from young people learning from their elders, as Dr. Kane has shared, and then vice versa, from our elders to learn from the young people. I think that one thing that I know, I think that um, some of our elders have learned from our young people in Boston is how do you use social media? And something that we know that young people really rely on is social media. And I'm not on social media, so Facebook, Twitter, though I'm not sure with Elon Musk purchasing Twitter, Twitter, Snapchat, Instagram, all these different outlets. I mean, I feel like there's so much for us to learn, and everyone is connected. And so, some of the most beautiful suicide prevention campaigns and behavioral health campaigns that we saw developed when I was at the city were from our young people taking their iPhones out and just taping themselves, their loved ones, and their family members, just being real and talking about whatever the issues they might be facing in their particular neighborhood. So I do think that that makes me hopeful in terms of what we can be doing better in the future. But I definitely think you've touched on something that I have heard is maybe a strategy for our collective recovery past COVID and everything, right? Like, how do you connect the generations, especially since there are so many positive, I think, aspects that can come out of young people, as Laureen said, connecting with older adults and everyone who have, everyone has been isolated during this time, but especially our elders in communities.
I would like to challenge a lot of our listeners that I know I got a lot of friends who say, I don't get on Facebook, I don't look at social media. And then there was a comment made earlier that says how much we can learn from young people. Well, their communication tool is social media. And sometimes you don't have to believe everything that's on social media. You don't have to look at everything that's on social media, but you can learn from them. When my patients used to come into the office, young folks, I'd like to listen to them. And I'd listen to some of the things before social media, some of the things that they were listening to in terms of their music and stuff. Doesn't say necessarily I was crazy about their music, but I wanted to at least look at what they were looking at, try to understand where they were coming from. And when you isolate yourself from the social media, we may be doing a disservice to ourselves because we're not looking to understand I don't want to say the other side, but people other than the ones our age and so on and so on. So I do look at social media. I am participatory in it. I don't believe everything that goes on with it because I want to call myself an intelligent individual. As like Tom Hanks says, I'm not a smart man, but I do listen and learn from people. And I think that we should at least think about, you don't have to send out texts or chat with a bunch of people, but you might want to look and listen, as you said, in terms of what is it what they have to offer in terms of solutions. And if we're not listening to them, we're not going to understand what they have to offer.
Yeah, the other part of it though is, the conversation about the isolation that's happened. We've got to ease out. We've got to ease back into our activities because COVID is still real. And we all know that when it comes to getting vaccinated, so many minorities they just do not trust and they're still not vaccinated. How do we address that? I mean, even, and a lot of young people, first of all, when we were all young, oh, excuse me, I don't mean to call you all old. We were younger. We were all younger.
Just me, right?
And we know that we think we're invincible, right? We don't think that we get COVID, but I've heard story after story of young people who've gotten COVID. They didn't think they would get it and how their life has changed. And now we have long haulers and things like that. So I always have to make sure that I insert that we want everybody to get back. It's not going to ever be like it used to be, in my opinion, but to our new normal and ease back into those activities. Check on those elderly people, check on those children. There are some children who don't have the parental support at home. I love teachers and those people, those coaches and other people who add that extra level of involvement in a child's life. So I think those are the things that the village, we talk about how the village can come to mind. I often tease with people and say that Laureen has gotten me involved in things that I don't typically get involved in. Like this past Saturday, we were at a church doing a farm raising. Like, who knew? Any of my friends that know me, you and farm raising, really? And so we're not going to say, I'm not going to tell you that, no, I did not put my hand in the soil, but I appreciated the farm raising. But Lorene, last time, and we've often talked, tell me about food security though. Are we seeing more, who are we seeing more showing up at the
Food
food
bank.
banks and places?
So because of COVID, it's pretty much being everybody who is not making six figures has been in a food line for the most part, which has been really surprising. And then the numbers started to ease up right before President Biden got into office. And as the housing crisis took root in Florida, especially in Jacksonville and the Northeast Florida region, and then the price of gas, the price of food, then the war in Ukraine, which is our breadbasket for the world, which is interrupting global supply chains related to everything grain. So we're starting to see those prices go up again. I mean, the prices of food have gone up tremendously, which is now increasing the number of people back on those food lines because even if you're making $25, $38 an hour in Jacksonville, the cost of housing is so high. And then you see the cost of gas now is about $4.15 a gallon, depending on where you're staying. And then a gallon of milk is almost $4. So if we start to break those real costs that people are on a fixed budget, or even people making a pretty good living, what used to, all of a sudden, because of the war in Ukraine and other things happening around the world, have completely thrown people off. And so now we are like, we went from a development team at Feeding Northeast Florida of 4 people, and we now have a development team of 12 people who are constantly raising money to feed our communities.
You know, Lorene, you brought up a good point. And I had a discussion with a friend the other day. You know, one of the things that, and just combining some of the discussion that we had, back in the Great Depression, when many people were jumping off buildings because of money issues and people standing in food lines because of lack of food, the continent that did not suffer that much was Africa. You know, they didn't have those issues because they were growing their own food. So they didn't feel the effects. And I guess I'm going back to what you said about the Ukraine breadbasket ideology. They didn't feel the effect of the Great Depression like many other nations and many other continents did because they were already growing their own food. So it wasn't a great impact to them. Okay. But barring the war machines coming onto the continent. And I think what we have to recognize is what you've been saying, and you've enlightened me on quite a bit, is that we need to start growing our own foods, our healthy foods. The community needs to help feed the community by helping harvest our own foods.
Yeah, hence the Black Church Food Security Network. What are the places, what are the resources, natural resources or resources in our communities that we feel, that you all feel are threatened, that used to be accessible to people before in order to help maintain good health? I know people don't feel safe getting out, walking. The systems that used to be in place. I know I was having a conversation with someone recently about having an event at a local park here in Jacksonville. And even we had a few months ago, we had some folks on talking about gang violence. And the discussion is that a lot of young people just don't have things to do. Monica, are you seeing that there are those resources or places and spaces that people used to take advantage of that were natural resources for them as far as their health is, to help maintain a healthy community, that are not present? And violence, gun violence. What are you seeing nationally though? I know you do some work, you've done some work in different places. Is there any relationship, any similarities in cities that you've seen as far as minority health is concerned?
I mean, I definitely think it's a good question to be asking. We are part of, so the president, the administration has in the last year rolled out an initiative looking at, I think there are probably a dozen cities across the country, large urban communities. I apologize that I'm not sure if Jacksonville or Miami, some of the larger communities in Florida, are part of this, but Detroit, Memphis, those are two of our priority cities at the Kresge Foundation. And so what we have seen during sort of COVID is, and you hear about it in the news, the way that the media portray places like New York City or Chicago, right? In Detroit, just this uptick in gun violence and homicides. I think what I can tell you is that, the health departments, I think mayor's offices, cities are trying their best to try to, and I'll speak only for Boston. In my work in Boston, some of it was seasonal. And a lot of us were talking about, this should be a year round effort that we should be working on as a city with communities, because the communities aren't waiting until warm weather. They're actually grappling with this every day in certain neighborhoods, often our Black and Brown communities in the city of Boston. So I definitely think what we're seeing in terms of homicides and access to illegal firearms. And I know in the work that we did in Massachusetts that there's that 95 corridor from the Northeast to the South, which is the major corridor, not only for firearms, but then also for drugs and opioids, that fuels some of the violence. And so thinking of ways to keep our youth and our young adults busy is important, but I don't think it's like a seasonal thing, right? I think we have to be working on it and with other partners. It's not just law enforcement. Clearly, we've seen that across the nation, that people are looking at community safety not from a kind of a point of view of everything is bad in large cities, but how can we tap into, and we talked about this throughout the podcast this evening, how can we tap into community assets to really build resilience and different opportunities in communities, so that that young people in particular, because in many cities they are the ones who are being victims of homicides and violence, and also perpetrators. And so how do we work as a community to address not only the violence, but then build on assets?
Well, Monica, you brought up a good point. And that's so in terms of what cities are facing, and some earlier you mentioned about the we used to call it the 10%, the ones who, that top 10% who are the ones actively involved that does this,
Mm-hmm.
and particularly during the civil rights movement. How would you suggest that a community gets started in terms of trying to correct the ship, as it may say, get involved and trying to get some of these ideas that you're mentioning get started along that line?
Well, I know that I think that community is in again, this is from my kind of local experience, and then what I hear from community members. In certain neighborhoods, violence might be the number one issue that your different community-based organizations, your faith-based leaders might be working on with residents. In other neighborhoods, as we've talked about, it could be food insecurity. So really getting a sense of what the major challenges are, the issues that any given neighborhood is facing. And then I think, Lorraine, I hope you agree that, and I hope that this is still the case in Florida, that you are able to reach out to your public health colleagues to try to help get the information that's necessary. And I think this is probably more difficult. So I'm not going to be naive about what the political context looks like in Florida, because the way that things are structured are different than in other parts of the country. Like all of your local health folks are employees of the state, but one would hope that you could think of ways. I would hope that your elected officials listen to their constituents, whether it's food insecurity or housing instability or lack of safe parks and places to, to exercise or to just be outdoors. Like these are the things that elected officials listen to. And maybe what I'm hearing from other places, we've been talking a lot about blue cities and red states. Are there blue cities? This is a question for all of you since you're in Florida. Are there blue cities in Florida where you've got, your local electeds and strong constituents and nonprofits and community residents who can mobilize around these public health challenges? I don't know enough about the Florida context in your communities, but I know, given what Lorraine has told me, like these are important issues for everyone. So I would be curious about what you think are the opportunities to sort of harness the energy of community residents.
I'd be first to volunteer an answer to that, be quite frank with you. I do think that all people, young, old, middle age, need to get more involved with local politics. As they used to say, all politics are local. And I think the elected officials that we have here, I don't care who they look like, if they're not in the best interest of the community, they need to be voted out for someone who's in the best interest of the community. Black, white, blue, green, yellow, I don't care about that. Just who's in the best interest of the community that we all serve. And I think we tend to get comfort. Some people tend to get comfort and not challenge those political leaders within our community as to what are they really doing to help this community get out of this rut or whatever, however, I can't think what to even call it right now, to get out of the situation that this community is in and start helping to benefit the community. They can be your cousins, they can be your uncles, I don't care who it is. If they're not doing anything for the community, then they need to go. And I think that's one of the leadership possibilities that we need to call on young folks and with the backing of older folks like myself to go and challenge with new ideas and new approaches to doing things is just my suggestion.
Tonight, we're talking about Minority Health Month. Have we had the conversations that we need to have when we talk about Minority Health Month? I mean, what's happening? And Dr. Kane, I'm gonna throw it at you. What are you seeing that's emerging with Minority Health Month or minority health issues rather? I know that next month is when we talk about those national health observances. Next month is High Blood Pressure Education Month, right? And we know that in minority communities, high blood pressure, diabetes still remain, and unfortunately cancer remain as leading health diseases that are impacting our communities. Are those the things that you're seeing in your practice without obviously being specific about your patients?
Absolutely. All of the above, diabetes, high blood pressure, obviously elevated cholesterol, also cancer, because those communities that we've mentioned before, many of those communities, minority communities, were designated areas of I'm gonna say Superfund sites, but sites where they were very what's the word I'm looking for? Chemical sites that were placed.
Environmental hazards, environmental contaminants.
Environmental contaminants, and we haven't really even measured, since we talked about the limitations being placed on the information being provided by the state of Florida as far as its citizens are concerned for their health status, health needs. We're not even being educated on what the effects that these environmental contaminants have had. Microplastics, I mean, in terms of what it's doing to our community, particularly, there was a show we was on. No, I'm sorry, it wasn't a show. It was a Zoom call that I was on earlier this week, and one of the young ladies bragged about how they were really getting their families a bunch of water because water was so critical to what they needed for their health status. But she kept referencing bottles of water, bottles of water, bottles of water. And we don't really know what effect these microplastics and plastics are having on the impact of whether or not it's black women and breast cancer or black folks in particular or minorities in particular, as it relates to the gut, which is the second brain of the body, and its communication as relates to what we know with the brain of the body in terms of dementia and any other ill effects it may be having on the community at large. And we tend, as the saying used to go, when white folks have cold, black folks have pneumonia. And so we don't even know the beginning of how severe this is without looking at all the parameters that are involved in lack of equity or disparities in healthcare. We have to start addressing those disparities and put at the forefront investigation, the research into how it is affecting our community so that we can develop ways that so that our community will be not as affected in terms of the detrimental effects of these disease states: diabetes, high blood pressure, cholesterol, mental health, and cancer.
Yeah, and that right there just seems so heavy. It seems like a heavy burden to bear as we continually hear. And I've shared several times. I started at the health department in 1982 and I left in 2019. And quite frankly, here in Northeast Florida, I didn't see much improvement in health outcomes from 1982 as I do now. But we've seen technology advances. We've seen advances in so many other areas. However, when it comes to the health of our communities, underserved communities, the issues rather still persist. Laureen, you've done a lot of work with the faith community. We know because we've had the conversations. We have access to the number of churches that are in our communities. How can the faith community help address not only food insecurity, but what are some other areas that the faith community can help? They have to know that the places, the neighborhoods where their churches lie, that, and I'm not going to name the neighborhood, the zip code, you and I know, there's a zip code in Jacksonville that has the most child removals, but it also has the most churches, right? So just imagine. So what are your thoughts about that, Laureen, in terms of what role should churches play in that?
So in my discussion with our faith leaders, one of the things that I've been asking them to do is to stop thinking about their mission work as being something they take outside of this country to do work, and that the folks that they should be seeking to save are right in the neighborhood. So having a discussion and understanding of what's going on in the neighborhood that they are located and concentrating all their efforts in creating a village. And I know I keep beating on that village concept, but really knowing who your neighbors are, even as an organization, a faith community. So if there are seniors who are lonely, if there's a woman who's pregnant, ensuring that she's getting the care that she needs so that she can have a healthy pregnancy and consequently have a healthy child. During the HIV/AIDS pandemic, one of the things that we as public health officials were trying to do is to get people to pair up. So if you have a medical visit, go with somebody else who can be your your medical advocate, because you may not be able to ask the questions that you need to be asking, and yet that person who's right next to you could be that person for you to ask the doctor, wait, you did not explain enough about the medication and the negative side effects it might have, or what other alternatives are there. So building those kind of processes that don't take very much, but pairing up people to advocate for one another. To also, if there's a child who's going hungry or who may be facing some kind of maltreatment from their parents, if you are connected to those families and you establish the church as a safe space for all the community members to feel welcome, then I see that as one of the driving forces, that it's outside government, even in Florida, that we can actually start to make some changes.
Wow. And I'm hopeful, by the way. If I talk about, if I sound like I'm feeling hopeless, I'm actually hopeful because I know we do make some strides in terms of, working with people who don't traditionally get involved. I know my friends have said, boy, I thought you retired, Jocelyn. Looks like you haven't retired. And I think as long as I see that there are disparities that persist in not just minority communities, but in underserved communities, I've shared my personal health issues and the things that I've done. Dr. Kane, I have to throw it back to you, and you don't have to comment. And I'm not picking on physicians, but I like that you and the Northeast Florida Medical Society, some of your members make, and I said some, I know what I said, some of your members make themselves available to go to churches, go to community-based organizations, making yourself available to educate people. When we all go to the doctor's office, we all understand that insurance guidelines does not allow you to spend the kind of time with us that we might need. But we are able, because you're coming out, you're in spaces like this, sharing your knowledge. And so people have to understand what's their role. How can I help? I was telling someone earlier that I was looking for someone and they recommended somebody to me. So we all have to know, our churches within our own circles, find the skill sets, the expertise, no matter what it is. You may not can do anything other than what Lorene say, but you have a car. Maybe you can take a person to their cancer treatment. Whatever. We have to know that all of us possess skills that we can use to be a part of that village that we need to grow in order to go to Miss Daisy up the street, because you haven't seen her come out of her house lately. You used to see her come out and water her lawn. You haven't seen her. So you're just gonna, call her if you have her number or ring her doorbell. Have a family member's contact information and say, I haven't seen your mom or your grandma lately. Is she okay? Is somebody checking in on her? And so those are the villages I think that we need to get back to, and making sure that we care for one another.
Well, let me say this. I go back to that 10% rule. There, even within my organization, there's that 10% that really, really is dedicated to taking care of the people in their community, in the community. I will say, like you, Jocelyn, I was looking to kind of, just float on into retirement. 2 years ago, I'm going like, okay, I'm done. I'm history. It's time for the younger folks to take over. But then COVID hit. And without looking like I'm doing this, the knowledge that I have of our community and the people in the community that have been serving this community well, I did not feel it was my right not to give that back to the community. Okay? Because there are good people in the community, all ages. I know many of them. And COVID was not the time to retire. Not, for many, and not just me, many of my fellow physicians, that could have done the same thing, and including you yourself, Jocelyn, because you was looking to sail on into retirement and kind of take it easy. But when being part of that 10%, you saw the demand for your services, just like Lorene has been very, very, I've been impressed with her even more so than I was 2 years ago, because she is really, really taking on the task of trying to support the community and being part of this community. And Monica, I really admire your efforts at what you're doing, whether it's with your organization, but I think, even though I don't know you, your heart is one in which, even if you were not in the organization, you would be out there being part of that 10% that is pushing the envelope to take care of people.
Yes, and as we, and on that note, it's 7:33. Although we are, I'm enjoying the conversation, and we certainly would like to have Monica back. We're going to always have Lorene back. She's a regular. But we would certainly like to have you, Monica, have you back and really talk about something that was on your mind tonight, perhaps that we did not cover. We know an hour is just a short period of time, but as we near the end of the show, we always like to give our guests an opportunity to share their final thoughts about our topic tonight of racial justice and health equity. So, Monica, I'll start with you. What are your final thoughts regarding tonight's discussion?
Well, I think I've really appreciated. I am not from Florida. My parents are living in South Carolina, and I know how difficult it is, especially in Florida. Not being from Florida, just what you all described in terms of the political landscape. And that doesn't take away from the fact that you've got great people, great leaders, the 10%, as Dr. Kane described, that are really there trying to lift up communities. And so I know maybe sometimes people think about Florida as that other place where there's so many bad public health messages coming out of, but what I've appreciated are these opportunities to hear and learn about what's happening, and the fact that there is a lot of commitment and a lot of wisdom to be shared to create the village that Lorene is clearly continuing to do outside of her public service. So, in whatever ways I can be supportive and helpful, and would be happy to join future conversations. Thank you for inviting me this evening.
Thank you. Thank you so much for tuning in. We know that you're traveling, so we really appreciate that you are you stepped away from your business to join us tonight. Lorene, what are your final thoughts as we end tonight's discussion?
I think the most important point that I would like to leave with everybody is check on each other, because people are suffering in silence. And if look through your contact list, and if there's somebody there you haven't reached out to in the last 2.5 years, please reach out to them and just let them know you care. And if there are any young people and seniors in your life, reach out to them. And through that, we can move the agenda forward. And as Dr. Reverend Heber Brown said, we need to get the word minority out of our brains, because we are a global majority. And if we could start thinking that way, that globally we have more in power together than if we start thinking about just the population that is represented and so-called minority in the United States. So we are a global majority that can shake and move things. So let's do it.
Thank you. That's awesome, Lorene. And you're right. I forgot he did say that, take the minority out of our vocabularies. Dr. Kane, what are your final thoughts as we end tonight's discussion?
Well, first of all, I'd like to thank both of our guests. This has been very enlightening. I enjoyed the conversation. I hope we can continue as a group to continue to communicate and to help each other. I am more willing and able to assist any of our guests in terms of what they may need. I would like for our audience to know that we don't have to just stick with the 10%. If they're not part of that 10%, they can become part of the 10%. They can rise to the challenge of what we're facing today. Remember, particularly the ones who are of a certain age, that your kids will inherit this earth. And what do you want to leave them in terms of what they're able to accomplish? It's not just about what kind of monies you may leave them, because you can leave them monies, but if they can't breathe, if they can't exercise their right for freedom, if they can't eat good foods, you're not leaving them very much. So get out, be willing to take those chances of making other people angry because you're trying to protect the village, and look out for the village as it stands as a village. I think we need to just go out and do the work that these two ladies are doing on a regular basis. And I promise to help from my end as much as I can to continue those efforts.
Thank you. And I think my final thoughts are from tonight's discussion is actually something that Lorraine and I have been talking about. And I think Monica even brought up, or someone in tonight, that we also need to make sure that we include our young people in the discussions. Those public health students, those college students, make sure that we're mentoring them. Bring our young people to community meetings with us so that they can hear what's going on in their community. Enlighten them. They go to school every day. They may not realize there are issues that are going on in their community. I know there are some people who've grown up in different arenas, and they said that the reason they got involved is because their parents drugged them along, and they were happy that their parents drugged them along because it motivated and inspired them to serve. I've had friends that tell me, you're still so busy. You have to, we all need to be a part of the solution rather than being a part of the problem. Thank you to our guests, Monica Valdez, Lupe. Hopefully I did not butcher your name, because people often butcher mine. Thank you, Dr. Lorraine Husband. And also thank our behind the scenes guy, Tyrone Jackson. He is our technology guru, and he had to help Monica tonight as she was experiencing some technology challenges. And we're so thankful to our listeners and viewers who tune in with us every Tuesday, and hopefully learning something that will inspire them to make a change or get involved in their community. Tune in next Tuesday as we continue our next discussion on Pause for the Truth. Good evening, everyone.
One last thing before we get off. Don't forget, I meant to say it during my last comments, we can learn from our young folks on social media. You can at least listen and learn. You don't have to participate to the level of interacting with everybody, but at least they're asking us to hear them. And you can't, if that's their basic way of communication, you can't hear them if you don't go and listen to them.
Absolutely. I feel like I should say amen. Don't you, Lorraine? Thank you, everyone. Good night. And thank you for tuning in.
Good night.
Good night.